Laser Light Cannon, the second episode of Steven Universe. In terms of its connection to the previous episode, there really isn't much of one, at least in terms of story anyway, which is a bit jarring going back from recent episodes to these earlier episodes, seeing how disjointed they were from each other, considering how serialized the show has become recently. And overall, I don't really feel that this episode works quite as well as the first one does, though I definitely feel like it works better than the next one. But we'll get to that in the review of the next episode. Not going to focus on it too much here. Just a quick reminder, there will be spoilers in this review. Spoilers for this episode and potentially future episodes, as these early episodes were really good at setting up for the events in future episodes. And I'm definitely going to talk about that. I said that this episode isn't very well connected to the first episode in terms of story. However, it is pretty well connected to the first episode in terms of theme. That is the theme of establishing the baseline for this show. If the last episode gave us a brief insight into Steven's mothers, that being the crystal gems, this one gives us some very brief insight into his biological parents, that being Greg Universe and Rose Quartz. In fact, this is the first time that we hear the name Rose Quartz, and the first time that we actually see an image that is connected to that name. The plot of the episode is fairly simple. The gems have discovered that something called a red eye is coming to Earth. It's not a moon, it's not a space station, it's some kind of giant alien probe that will crash into the planet and destroy the entire city, if not worse. It's quite large, it's quite durable, and nothing that they have on hand is powerful enough to destroy it. The only thing they know that could do the job is Rose Quartz's laser light cannon. The problem being that no one knows where it is. So Steven says, if it was my mom's, then maybe my dad knows where it is. So he goes to Greg, who is living in his van, and seems like kind of a vagrant. And to be honest, based on just his portrayal in this episode, I have a hard time deciding whether or not I actually like the guy, but that's not really what's important here. What's important is getting to see how much faith Steven has in his father and how much he loves his father. Because even when the gems insist that it's almost impossible that Rose would have entrusted something as powerful as her cannon to Greg, Steven still, he doesn't believe them. He goes and he asks Greg, and eventually they do find the cannon. It's in the back of his storage unit where he keeps all the stuff that he can't take with him in his van on a daily basis. And this scene in his storage unit is one of the most important in the early run of the series, because not only are there tons of things in there that I am absolutely positive are going to be important later on in the show, we get a first hint of how resourceful Steven can be when everyday circumstances become extraordinary, using items that he finds laying around the storage unit to help him navigate the storage unit until he finds what he's looking for, and then coming up with a method to transport the cannon to the other gems so that they can use it. And there's one line that I absolutely love in this scene when he goes in there and he sees all of his dad's stuff, quite possibly for the very first time, because I don't think he knew about the storage unit until he sees it in this episode, and he says, hey, it's like a dad museum in here, and that's just an absolutely fantastic way of putting it, because it's just so cute and it's so quintessentially Steven that I absolutely love it. It's a perfect line in a pretty great scene. But the characterization of Greg here, I don't think quite lives up to what they intended it to be. I think he was intended to be endearing, and instead he just came off as kind of aloof and uninterested, and it just didn't quite work out. We're also introduced to what is supposedly Greg's catchphrase here: if every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs, which is something that I don't think we ever hear him say again after this episode. But he says it like all the time here, and it just feels like an inconsistency with the rest of the show. Not that it isn't a good phrase, there is a pretty potent meaning behind it. I just don't like how it feels like it was almost shoehorned in to teach a lesson. That lesson being that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and that it was wrong for the gems to discount Greg as a resource. It's pretty straightforward, and I feel like if this episode were done in a more current episode format, it would have been a lot more subtle and had a lot more weight to it. But of course this phrase has another meaning. It is the passphrase to activate Rose's cannon. They use the cannon to destroy the red eye, and then you have one really good moment from Greg in this episode where he realizes that Rose very likely reset the password for the cannon based on his phrase, and he's reminded how much Rose loved him. And he gets a tear in his eye, and it's very sweet, and it's the scene in this episode that made me think, oh, well, maybe I will like this guy if I just give you another chance. If there's any other character that we get any insight into in this episode, it's Amethyst, where we get to see just how much tenacity she has, as the gem's only secondary course of action is to just take her and chuck her over and over again at the Red Eye. And to her credit, she doesn't give up. And it's really funny, some really funny scenes, and it's one of the things that elevates this episode above the average and keeps me from overlooking it as I do some of these other earlier episodes. Not that any episode of this show should be overlooked. They're all good in some way or another. But guys, what did you think about this episode? What do you think of Greg? Do you like him as a character? Do you kind of feel the same way that I did, at least back at the time of this episode? Have your feelings about him changed over the course of the show? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. This has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.